Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. So hopefully you're here for the Building a Culture of Innovation workshop. And I think you're in for a treat because we have a pretty great session planned for you. So I need to admit people as we go. My name is Sydney Hyatt. I work at Lilly for, I guess it's been a little over a year now, and I'm honored to be the facilitator for this session today. We get the opportunity to hear from Michael Buckham-White, a technology managing director for Deloitte Information Technology Services. He leads the global brand, including Deloitte.com, global clients and industries, US firm executive offices, and innovation portfolios, focusing on driving strategic alignment with the business. He also leads global IT innovation efforts, partnering with key member firm IT innovation groups to identify, track, and globalize emerging technologies. He's passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and leads the cross-business next-generation pipeline efforts for Black professionals in the US firm. Michael was also a company officer and the senior vice president for sales and marketing at Agilysys, a publicly traded software company. He has held a number of executive positions at global software company Premier Global Services Incorporated, including Vice President of Customer Insight and Analytics, Vice President of Digital and Marketing Automation, and Director of Web Development. Now that you heard a fraction of his impressive portfolio, I'd like to make sure everyone has their chat boxes ready to go, their mute button ready to go, to be able to engage with and interact with our speaker, asking questions as we go and just engaging all around. And without further ado, and on behalf of BDPA, I'd like to thank you all for joining and hand the session over to our presenter.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Sydney. I'm good. We have a small group here today, and this was originally set up for a webinar, and I asked them to move it to a regular Zoom meeting because I want to make sure that there's interactivity here amongst those who are here. I didn't care if it was 50, 60, even if we got up to 100 people, but we have 11 here today. So I'm going to ask you to engage if you are comfortable with what you have on and the way you look. I'd love for you to open up on video. I know some of you are probably going to be multitasking and all of that, but I want you to engage. I want you to stop me at any time to ask questions. This is really set up not for me to talk at you, but for us to have a dialogue together around innovation. And really and truly, when you're talking about a culture of innovation, how do you ready yourself and your organization for innovation? And we're going to talk about it at a number of levels. So it's a passion area of mine. Let me tell you a little something about my background and how innovation became important to me so that you'll have an idea of my mindset. I graduated from Alabama A&M University in Huntsville, Alabama. So I'm an HBCU grad. And I have a master's degree from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. What that doesn't tell you is it took me 6 years to graduate from undergraduate. I had a great time in college. And I went to more than Alabama A&M University. I think I went to 3 or 4 schools before I finished up my last 2 years at Alabama A&M. And I share that with you because what it demonstrates for me is persistence and being able to engage in a different way in every environment I was, to stick to it and to be persistent. I'll also tell you that I am not a trained technologist. Many of you are. You're engineers, probably, you're IT professionals. You have computer science degrees or working on computer science degrees. I have none of that. I have a marketing and communications degree as a bachelor's as well as a master's. And the reason why I fell into technology is because a long time ago, roundabout right before the new millennium, and I was this marketing communications guy who said, I really see this thing that's coming out right now, and I think it's a great way to reach a targeted audience with my message. And that was the internet. So I went to the IT department and they said to me, oh, I think it's a great idea that you leverage the internet to get to your target audience. And they said, but sorry, I can't help you. But here's a book. Go learn how to do HTML. Go learn how to do some programming. And as a result of that, I said, yep, sure, I got to figure this thing out. I was able to dig in a bit, start creating websites, and had some very early success that led me to ride the internet wave. And then with that came marketing automation, and with that came social. And with that came changing my mindset on a regular basis in order to learn something new. And when you talk about innovation, I think the important thing there is it's about challenging yourself, challenging your organization, and setting up a structure where you can enable other people to innovate with you. So we're going to talk about innovation. How do you ready yourself? How do you create a culture of innovation? And then I'm going to give you some tangible ways that I have instituted an innovation model for Deloitte, the largest professional services firm in the world, for 10,000 IT practitioners from South Africa to New York to Singapore and everything in between. Is that fair? Awesome, awesome. So let's get into it, right? So I want to set the stage for what it means for you in your mindset. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So those of you who are shy, please don't be shy. I may call on you. Now, I promise you, maybe I can't, I won't promise you I won't call on you. But I want you to feel free to engage, please, because that's what makes this fun. That makes it more interesting. And I'm not talking at you, but we are having a dialogue and a discussion, and we can truly treat it as a workshop. So what is your mindset? I shared with you a little bit about my mindset and the things that I did early in my career and the midpoint in my career to ensure that I had a mindset that allowed me to uncover and discover and allow myself to learn new things. We're not going to talk about machine learning. We're not going to talk about cloud. We're not going to talk about natural language generation. We're going to talk more about how do you leverage all those things and ensure that you are allowing yourself to engage in that way. First off, I want to ask you, how do you challenge your mindset? And what are some of the key principles that you can employ and challenge yourself with to ensure that you are indeed challenging your mindset? For those of you who are recently out of college or still in college, tell me a little bit about how the transformation was for you when you left college and then went in to the workforce. Was it exactly what you expected when you left college? Probably not. It was different. The same thing happens when you transition jobs. It was probably different. Culture was different. The things you had to learn were different. So what got you where you were, where you are, is not going to get you where you want to go. So when you're challenging your mindset in order for you to be ripe for innovation, you're going to have to evaluate, oh, great, you've had some success. You've graduated from college, you're a director, or you're a leader, you're a manager. Whatever the case may be that you are today, maybe you're just a junior consultant or you're individual contributor, you've achieved some level of success. I've been up and down the food chain. And I got to tell you, at every level, when I first became a manager, I had to learn some new things. I had to learn some new skills. When I became a director, I had to learn some new skills. When I was a vice president and a senior vice president, all of those things required me to learn new skills. Quite frankly, the job that when I was a senior vice president, I wasn't learning skills fast enough and I was not successful in the long term in that role. I'm going to ask one of you to share with me an example of how maybe some of our more seasoned folk, where you realized that what got you to your role was not going to get you to the next role that you were seeking. And what were some of the things that you had to do differently, specifically around what you do? Perry, you don't look 21. I'm going to ask you, unless you may be 25, but you're not 21.
You're close, Michael.
I'm going to ask you, how does this statement resonate with you?
Well, it was very interesting. On my 21st birthday, I actually graduated from Paris Island Marine Corps boot camp.
Appreciate your service.
So innovation was kind of part of a ritual for us, always thinking outside the box. But I want to answer your question. One of the aspects early in my career when I graduated, I double majored at Temple, and I had a political science degree and a computer science major. So for the first part of my tour in Quantico, I was a software quality assurance analyst. But I was there for 3 years. But I also was supporting the Marine Corps Marathon as a finish line support officer. Back then, I was before the internet, so everything was on mainframe. So fast forward, to answer your question, the next evolution, I was sent to headquarters Marine Corps to run an assignment model. And today we call that HRIS, Human Resource Information System, or even something different. Yeah. But in essence, we in the military, we assign our military personnel to their next duty station back then based on a wish list. And we had algorithms that determine various levels of the data dictionary as to where they would go, the best fit to the next duty station. So it was that part where I had to learn something completely new, because I'm a Temple University graduate, we had great teachers, instructors, and even in our own computer sciences school in Quantico, we never learned about software or software development with respect to modeling, or with respect to aggregate data collection and taking different databases and then creating different results for our monitors to make those next assignments. So that was where I had to pivot, where it was something I did not learn in college. I did not learn on my first duty station, but we had to pretty much use that for assignment. So that was my tour when I was at headquarters, but it was a very exciting tour, and which probably helped me where I am today with respect to industry and BDPA, because I get to know people, and you basically get to make assignments based on not necessarily what they have on paper, but what they do in extracurricular activities. Part of that helped out when we had to move reserve components in with active duty. For an example, if we're assigning a Marine from one duty station to another and bringing in reservists, do we take what they do as a civilian? If he, like for example, if he or she were a police officer in civilian life, but they may have been a mechanic on active duty, which of those career assets do we prioritize in the data dictionary of the system to make that assignment? So those are areas that was very exciting, extremely rewarding. And again, the innovation kicks in because you know, someone like myself, I had to innovate. I had to say, okay, what does this really mean? What is the end state? What do we need? So I'll shut up now. And
no, that was fantastic, Perry.
I appreciate chat about it.
No, I appreciate you telling your story and allowing me to pick on you as the first person. I'll pick on somebody else later on. But I think that is a great example of, you were trained for one thing and you had success, you matriculated, and then you got there and you had to make some adjustments. You had to start evaluating what it's going to take for you to advance in your career and do new things, as well as what other people are going to have to learn that you brought in order to help them get to a new place. Because we have to continue to evolve. One of the things we know about technology, it is going to change. And it's going to change dramatically. It is without a doubt the fastest moving thing that we have. We are emotionally, somebody said the other day, in the paleo age, I'm not saying it correct, emotionally. We have not advanced emotionally. We are in almost medieval times when it comes to our government and politics. When it comes to technology, we are so far ahead. We're like beyond where anyone would have ever imagined even 10 years ago. And that's how quickly things are advancing, and that's all because of technology. One of the things that is really important is to know the difference between, particularly in technology, and if you're in IT or in engineering, the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So has anybody ever heard that terminology before? Does anybody want to take a guess at what growth mindset is? I'll help you out. So Carol Dweck wrote a book a while ago. She was a teacher and she was teaching children. And she wrote about mindset. And she did this compare and contrast with fixed mindset and growth mindset. And she was studying with, she's doing this study with children, and she gave them a puzzle. And gave them a puzzle that they could continue to work on and learn how to do that specific puzzle. And then she took those away and pulled out some more complex puzzles. And she says, hey kids, we're going to switch things up. I'm going to give you a new puzzle to work with, and it's going to be a complex puzzle. It's going to be really, really hard. What do you think the kids said? Take a guess, anybody. Jaleel, what do you think?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
No, I caught you multitasking, but that's all right. I was asking you about the kids. Carol Dweck was doing this study in a class, and she gave these kids a puzzle.
Mhm.
And she let them do the puzzle multiple times.
Mhm.
And then she took the puzzle away and she said, listen, kids, these were about six or 7 years old kids.
Mhm.
She said, I'm going to give you a really, really hard puzzle to work on. And she stuck it in front of them. And what do you think the reaction of the kids were?
How am I supposed to do this? Or they probably gave it a try the first time and then was just like, I can't do this because it seemed more complicated than the first time.
That's what I thought when I first heard that story. The children said overwhelmingly, ooh, cool. One of them said, I like doing hard puzzles.
Mm.
And the other kids just dove in and they started working on it and eventually figuring out how to do the complex puzzle. What happens with children that we lose as adults is that we lose that energy and curiosity to learn and take on bigger challenges. We get really good at doing the same thing over and over again. And in fact, our culture and our jobs say, we're hiring you to do a job and we want you to do that job really, really well. And you get really, really good at that job. And then we get very comfortable in that and then have a degree of uncomfortability when somebody makes our job harder. Right. Somewhere along the line, we got trained to stay fixed on a place and fixed doing it a certain way. Where as children, we were ready to take on more complex things and learn and challenge ourselves. And she wrote an entire book about this. And I teach a course at Deloitte, facilitated over 10 times to leaders, people starting in the firm, about growth mindset and challenging the status quo. If we don't challenge the status quo, they're really smart people who learned how to run the organization of Sears and Roebuck and J.C. Penney and Caldor. Very smart people, 100-year-old plus companies. Some of us are old enough to remember when they used to send out this big old book catalog of all of these items that you can't even imagine how many items are in there that you could buy. And we'd look through it and you'd order things and you'd call them on the phone. And those organizations, those companies are failing now. Caldor is out of business. Sears and Roebuck is on its last leg. Think about companies like Kodak. And those of you who are old enough to remember Blockbuster. Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix 7 times. Very smart people there, but they had a fixed mindset. How do you work for JCPenney, Sears and Roebuck, and not realize that the internet is your new catalog? It's because you were focused on doing things the way you had always done them. And you weren't challenging yourself, giving yourself more complex problems and challenging what the status quo was. Now, there are a lot of other reasons why those companies have failed or are failing, but certainly not having a growth mindset is a part of it. Skipping ahead, we clicked it too quick, but unconscious bias. Now, you may be thinking I'm talking about people who are not Black and of color having unconscious bias towards us. I'm not talking about that. We know that that's true. What I'm talking about here is unconscious bias that we have about how things should be done, about the people that we choose for our teams, about the choices we make. We have unconscious bias that we are not aware of, that we have to become aware of, that allows us to challenge our mindset. A lot of times I walk in the room as a leader, and if I don't set the tone in the beginning that we're going to engage and I want everybody's opinion, and if I speak, people just kind of get in line with what I say because I've got a lot of experience. Well, let me tell you something. I know about machine learning, but if you ask me to program machine learning, you can forget it. I have to be open to the perspectives of other people. And when I talk about removing my conscious bias and unconscious bias, to not get in the way of me challenging my mindset or the mindset of my team so that we can advance further. The same thing comes with building diverse teams. Yes, we need to build diverse teams in our organizations and challenge our leaders to build diverse teams that are represented by racial diversity, right? Though that's the obvious one. Gender diversity in technology, women are not represented in a meaningful enough way. We have to do better there. But we also have to have cognitive diversity. If we all think the same, and I hire you because you went to Alabama A&M University or the University of Alabama, or you're from New York, where I'm originally from, or you live in Atlanta, where I live today, I'm not necessarily building diversity in my teams because I need to be able to build a team. You need to be able to build a team that can challenge unconscious bias, but also cognitive diversity being a center point for the growth of that team. I'm gonna pause there and see if there are any reactions, comments, or questions about these 4 components that I want you all to think about when you're looking at first challenging your mindset for the benefit of innovation.
I'd like to add something to that when you were talking about the various groups of diversity, but also abilities, differences in abilities, and often those groups are forgotten. And especially with the strong reoccurrence that we're seeing with autism, how is that going to play out in the workplace for the future? Are our workplaces ready for that? And to embrace, various abilities and even moving folks to leadership? What is leadership going to look like? And the last thing I'll just say, I'm glad you're talking about this because in many cases, there is the notion that we should have a growth mindset, but leaders also have to be careful not to pigeonhole employees because employees are doing such a great job for their particular business unit that they want to be selfish and not allow employees to grow and enhance the organization. So I think it goes both ways.
Spot on, Lakeisha, spot on. There is, we're all trying to figure out what the future of work looks like. Organization leaders are trying to figure it out. The US CEO of Deloitte was just on Squawk Box today talking about the future of work for Deloitte. And one of those things that is really important is it's not just about the future of work for us that are on this call. It is about people with different abilities. And what is the future of work when we're in a hybrid environment? How does that work? How can they engage? And I've got a person that I know, she's brilliant, Yvette Pegues. She's a fighter for the rights of those with different abilities. She is a paraplegic and she's a technologist and wicked smart. and she is an advocate for people with other abilities. And those people with other abilities she has a totally different perspective that she brings to the table that makes us better, in the choices that we're making. But I think you're spot on. That is a part of diversity as well. Anybody else?
So Mike, this is Perry again. I'd like to dovetail on what Lakeisha mentioned. You know, what I alluded to earlier about the assignment models and looking at the unconscious bias. Are leaders now or project managers, you know, people, are we putting these biases, it's probably a rhetorical question, but are these biases finding their ways into artificial intelligence, machine learning with respect to these assignments? For an example, if we were to take what I did years ago and throw in the AI component, if I needed certain staff with certain capabilities, I would factor that into my assignment model, virtually guaranteeing me that I'm going to get an A team or the dream team. So how is leadership working with this growth mindset? Because everybody wants to grow, and how do we get what we consider the quality spread or the equity assigned, the right people assigned to the right teams at the right time? How would that work with leadership?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I think one of the things that you can do in your organizations right now is challenge your organization's policy on ethical technology. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is a key example of that. Two areas. There's been a number of articles about how facial recognition, because it was made by typically white males or Asian males, it has bias in the way the facial features are recognized, particularly when you're talking about profiling. I'm not going to get into down that rabbit hole, but you all can fill in the blank on what I mean by profile around facial recognition. And because there was no one at the table with a diverse perspective outside of that group, then that algorithm, that artificial intelligence was flawed and it failed. There's a lot of research out there about that. The other thing that I would say is you have to look at installing ethical tech principles in any innovation that you're doing and challenge your organization to ask them what their policy is on that. It's very key for the future, and it's on target for challenging your mindset and the mindset of your organization. Great point, Perry. I'm going to move us along a bit and talk about organizational mindset. And we're going to do this fairly quick because I want to get to some of the models that that we have. Okay, somebody, Victor, you know Yvette, huh?
Awesome. I was speaking of Dr. Ayanna Howard.
Okay, got it. Another person probably who fits Yvette is charge. But organizational mindset, when you think about organizational mindset, you have to think about it in a couple of ways. What is the organization's mindset around innovation in particular? What is their focus area? How can an organization really align themselves effectively? And what are some of the things that they're going to do? First, I would say that an organization has to look at what does it mean to your organization? What is our focus area? So I've got a couple of things up there talking about be open to change. That's a table stake. You got to be open to change and challenge status quo, but you also have to embrace creativity. You also have to make a decision as an organization culturally. Are we going to think big or are we going to think small? There's no wrong answer to it, but you have to be willing to answer the question, do we want big innovation or do we want little innovation or something in between? And then show courage, because when you show courage, if you allow people to show courage and not be afraid to make mistakes, and I'll talk about failure a little bit later on when I look at the building blocks of the right model, you want people to feel comfortable with that change. Google had for many years allowed their folks 10 to 20% of their time outside of their normal job to innovate. That takes a lot of courage. That probably took a lot of courage early on. But what they established there was we want people focusing on the future and giving them permission to do something that they may be passionate about that could move the needle for the organization. And ultimately, Google is a $1 trillion cap-based company right now. right? So it's been proven out. Also understanding the work of innovation by levels. So I'll go through these very briefly, but we have people at different levels. I want you to put yourself into what your role is. Some of you are going to be leaders, managers, setting policy, but also some are going to be individual contributors. Your job as an individual contributor, first and foremost, is to ideate and create. Give yourself the space, create in the things that you do every day, and take the responsibility to ideate and create. If you're a team leader, you need to encourage your team, right? To challenge, create an innovation process, obtaining resources for outside your units, get knowledge from someone else, bring it into your team so your team can be challenged. Now, if you're a manager, you want to be able to support innovation teams, serving as connectors, as a champion, bringing all other teams together. And then certainly when you look at the function level or the senior leadership level, you got to set policy. It starts with you. I have to create an environment that allows people to feel like they can innovate and grow and challenge status quo. I've got to develop a strategy for the organization, in which I have, in order to enable people to innovate. I have to give them the knowledge. I have to challenge them with knowledge. I have to give them the space to experiment. I've got to create enthusiasm, and I'll talk about some of that a little bit later on. They'll develop what's needed for innovative thinking. Tool sets, skill sets. Do you bring somebody in from the outside? If you're a Microsoft shop, bringing in people from Microsoft to share their latest thinking. And it can run the gamut from cloud computing all the way to what they're doing for virtual reality, which is a big thing right now for the future of work. All of your organizations are thinking about the future of work and how do we bridge the gap in this hybrid environment. And then what did I talk about at the very beginning? Mindset. Setting the tone for your organization and creating a culture where the mindset of innovation, a growth mindset, but a mindset of innovation is key and central to the success. Now, supporting innovation and the cultural elements thereof vary. Pretty straight, oops, sorry, skipping ahead too fast. Create a customer-focused culture. What does that mean to you? Sydney, I know you're the facilitator, but let me ask you, what does it mean to you to set a customer-focused culture around innovation?
Customer-focused culture. I would say, just making sure everything you do is tailored to the end result and your end user. I know that's kind of a technical way to say it, but doing everything that's not just for you. Everything has a higher purpose. Everything's beyond you. So I would say that's the way to go about it and innovate in that sense. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. It does. We have to, there was a time, if you go back 20 years, that IT set the standard, developed the technology and said, here you go. Because we were the smartest people in the room, at least so we thought, right? And there are a lot of technologists who do a lot of cool things, create a lot of cool applications, build a lot of great platforms and solutions. If no one uses it, how good is that application? I see you smiling, Lakeisha. And I
Not
see
very
Carl
good.
coming off mute. Come on, Carl.
Not very good. There are a lot of technology that has been completely unused. The engineers thought it was great. They thought it was going to sell like sliced bread. And once you got it out in front of the buying public, they snubbed their nose at it with their wallets. Very
Absolutely.
simple.
And so the culture had to change. And,
Yes.
and I think that is where we are today. And it starts with focusing on the customer and a culture that focuses on the customer so that you're able to deliver products internally and externally that are actually going to be used. And they can be cool too. But cool with no users ain't cool. Appreciate that, Carl.
I can add to that, but one thing in our organization, we have a saying that's developed with purpose, because in the past there was so much investment in things that were cool that just went to the wayside.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Mike, this is Perry again. I have a question for you in the audience. So if one were to create, that customer focused culture, walk us through how teams would support a culture that's laser focused on the status quo. Take us through some scenarios where good leaders and good managers can actually still leverage innovation, even though the customer still wants to drink from the same Kool-Aid year over year.
I'll say, well, I'll yield and I'll let others answer, but I can answer your question if no one wants to.
I just wrote a question, but I was just thinking that if design thinking is maybe incorporated into the culture of the organization, that can help with that customer-centric focus.
Absolutely. There are lots of tools out there, design thinking being one of them, scaled agile. In a lot of application development teams, they want to do scaled agile, which is the iterative design, trains and things of that nature. But if you do not have your customer at the table, they may be resistant at first because it's more work for them. But if you can get them to try to engage in a pilot format in order for them to have a greater impact on what's built and the user experience and the user stories that are created, there is clear proof that one, you will be able to deliver faster over time, and you will be able to deliver a more useful and quality product. There's lots of research out there. I would encourage you, Perry, and you're probably being poking the bear a little bit when you already probably know the answer, but these are some of the things that you can do in order to bring people in. You also have to make an effort to listen to your customers. You got to go talk to them. But Carl, anything you want to say? I see you came off.
Yeah, I did. Mr. Carter is such an intellectual, and he always asks these very tough, detailed questions. But what I'd like to add is what his question was about, and what you also just said, and that is there are a lot of customers that really don't know what they want, but if you develop it and you deliver it with the right usability, they will love it. And in a lot of cases, the technology is clunky and they're unwilling to use it because you didn't think that through. And the other big component that I think Mr. Carter asked a question is that how do you get them to release what they currently are using? And you have to modify their behavior and slowly wean them off of that old technology, make it so premium wise and advantageous price wise that they would look at it and say they would be crazy not to go, because the most expensive thing that you can do is to create new technology, new products, and still have to manage backward compatibility to the new stuff. That will kill you. So you have to manage your innovation with those things.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Great commentary there. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. I think at the core of the question, what I heard is that the customer wanted to continue to drink from basically the same Kool-Aid. And what I would say is innovation comes in many different packages, right? And I think Carl just hit on one of the main ones. You're not always changing the end product. It's how you get there, though, which could impact cost, which at the end of the day, customers are always going to respond to a better price point, right? So you can make a process in order to get to your end result much more efficient. You can automate it. Innovation comes there as well. So I would say, don't limit yourself, when you're thinking about innovation, to be just the end result. It could be the process that you take to get to that end result as well.
Absolutely. Great.
And I know it's close to ending, but here's a question for you that I'd love to get some input from you. Mm-hmm. Is that within a company, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are in jobs, maybe not careers, where they are not really hitting on their true talents, and therefore they really aren't truly contributing. How do you find them to understand what they truly can bring to the table and put them in the right spots to leverage their expertise, their talents, to maybe where they don't have the expertise and knowledge to get it done, but you've missed by misplacing them in the wrong places? What's your thoughts on that, being a senior exec within a services group?
Yeah, I think you have to, part of it is what we're talking about here, is creating a culture, and I'll give you some techniques that we've used within Deloitte to do this. You've got to create an opportunity for them to share their ideas around particular business problems or customer problems. And you can do that in a couple of ways. I run a campaign across Deloitte IT that focuses on solving business problems, internal IT problems, challenges that exist across the organization. And you would be surprised once you open up the aperture and say, and I should say, Carl, that I don't believe that the answer is having an innovation team. I think that's a part of what structure that needs to be in place for an organization. But I believe fundamentally that innovation should be democratized and is the job of every technology professional within the organization. And so when I come to you with business challenges that I've collected for both internal as well as external, and I open my aperture and open the door to say, hey, these are the challenges that we're facing. I'm going to run an ideation campaign around these challenges, and I'm going to ask anybody who has an idea to submit that idea. And if that idea is aligned to what that challenge is and meets the spirit of what I've asked or what the team has asked, I'm going to ask you to form a team to further ideate and build a plan that would get us to developing something that would solve for that business problem. As an example, during COVID, I did not focus on a particular, we need to solve an issue with this application that serves this audience. I need you, all of IT, 10,000 people, I need you to think about what it's going to take. What can Deloitte do today to help us prepare for the impact of what COVID is going to do to our business? What is going to be the future of work? How should we focus on talent differently? How can we help people's well-being? You would be surprised how many people felt like they could bring their ideas and their skills to the table to say, this is the idea I think that will benefit the organization. And it was broad enough, you can't always do this, but it was broad enough that people had a large range to develop their ideas, share their ideas, and build a team if those ideas were selected to be matured in even further. Carl, does that give you an idea about how to do that?
Absolutely. Thank you.
You got it. So you're seeing the other things here on this page around cultural elements, creating an entrepreneurship program, very important for those of us that are internal. How can we learn from entrepreneurs and developing that mindset? Give everyone the opportunity to innovate, and don't just acknowledge ideas, act on them. One of the failures that I've had in my career is I grabbed a lot of these ideas and said, great, I even rewarded them, gave them money, but I did not execute on the future of that idea. So they created an idea, had a lot of enthusiasm, but it went nowhere. I didn't act on it fast enough. And what happens? 6 months, a year goes by, guess what? Things have changed. So make sure that when you are encouraging people to share ideas and act on that idea and innovate, that you as a leader act on them. That means you got to find some funding to make that happen or align it with a business need. So I'm going to give you a model here around how you can create innovation. This is not the only way to do things. This is not the end all be all, but it is a way that I have found that has worked for us. It certainly works at Deloitte, and I'm not going to give you all of the specifics of it, but I'm going to give you some generalities that you can take and apply it to your organization or your team. First off is I want to tell you, when we created an innovation network, this is something that we did, and it's comprised of many volunteers. I've got over 130 volunteers from around the world that help fuel our innovation efforts in varying areas. And we have multiple work streams and constructs. But I ask for people who have a passion for innovation. And I don't want just app dev people, which is that's where the tendency is for people to be drawn into. I want people who are in finance. I want an attorney, because they're going to give, what did we talk about earlier, that diverse thinking to the table. But most importantly for me, for this innovation network, I want passion around innovation. I'm okay with people who just want to learn. That's cool too. And our purpose is to effectively sense, focus, enable, and cultivate innovation across global IT, 10,000 practitioners around the world, speaking different languages and having different roles across their organizations. But it's rooted, no surprise here, we talked about it earlier, in partnership with the business. If we're innovating just for innovation's sake, Carl said it great, you can build a whole lot of cool things, and if nobody uses it, you've just wasted your organization a ton of money and time. I've also talked about the democratization of innovation. Our goal in the Innovation Network is to ensure that we are enabling in every one of those 10,000 IT practitioners, no matter what their current job is, that it is their responsibility and their duty to themselves and to their teams in the organization for them to learn, experiment, and feel like they can be a part of ideation and innovation. You may not know how to program a thing in your life, but you can think, and that's okay. And so we wanted to ensure that this was a grassroots organization. Surely we have an innovation team that does innovation work, works with digital assistants and analytics and things of that nature. But we want people to feel like they're a part of the innovation. So how do we do that? There are a couple of key elements that I'll share with you today. One is sensing. This is really important. There are a couple of key areas around this. So emerging technology, we have to evaluate what's emerging, but not only evaluate what's emerging, there are hundreds of new types of competencies that we assess every year. But we apply that with a lens to what's important for our organization. You would need to do the same, because it may not be as relevant, and that emerging technology may not be mature enough for it to be applied. Business need, we've talked about that ad nauseum. Align with the specific business ask and their challenges, bring them into the process, whether that's at a micro application development in a portfolio level, or if you're asking people to ideate around a particular business issue that's more broad than just the team that typically serves them or that customer. Identify a focus. We talked about you can't boil the ocean. Let's get focus here on sensing. And then one key thing here for those of you who are setting policy, and that is that whatever your sensing activities are, make sure that they're cross competency and that you're thinking not just for the current fiscal year, but outline fiscal years, but also coordinate it with a time frame that allows you to align it to the strategy that's being developed for the organization or the product team, and the budgeting that goes the budgeting process. Because it's one thing for you to sense, and if you're out of sync with your sensing activities, strategy's already set, budgets have already been decided. Well, guess what? You got to wait another year. All right. So that's sensing. Education is the second. Continuous learning, learning for all. I talked about democratization of innovation. You'd be surprised if you're in your bubble and you might be the best web developer in the world, but you may have no clue about the cloud. So how do you get more people to understand about cloud? How do you get more people to understand about ethical tech? We just did an ethical tech, what we call a boot camp. And we had thousands of people from over 40 countries from around the world attend. of varying degrees: application development, finance, infrastructure, cyber, is around ethical tech. So you've got to continue to educate people with that sensing that you're doing and what's something that they should be focused on. And then focused learning. How can you get deeper, a deeper level of education for your folks? Then also generating energy. I told you that you had to be passionate about it. Innovation is exciting. How do you get people excited? I talked about campaigns. We need passionate leaders and volunteers to help fuel that energy. Then incentivize innovation. What are you going to do to reward people? And it doesn't always have to be money, but money helps. But recognition. One of the things that we do when we have these contests, we have them present. These are people, we have them present to the top leadership in IT in the organization. Think about that from somebody who's a second year out of college, getting exposure because of their idea was strong enough to reach to the top, that you're presenting in front of the most senior leadership of IT in the world. It can be very powerful. Share the stories of success. What's working? What have people done? Where are they using it? Where did that ideation mature? Anytime I'm able to tie to revenue or cost reduction, I'm raising my hand and I am promoting that as much as I can, because what that does is gets you more funding, gets you more notice as an individual, but it also encourages other people to do more. Then there's experimentation. Pretty straightforward. You know, you've got to allow for failure. Fail fast, fail small. You've got to give people the permission to fail. I will tell you, if there is not enough failure in your experimentation, you're failing to push the limits. There should be failure. And if you're not doing that in your experimentation, you need to rethink how much you're pushing people to push the envelope. Then there's creative methodology. We have a lot of governance in technology. We can't put a product out that doesn't have all of these standards around it and it's going through the requisite risk protocols. But around ideation and rapid experimentation, you don't want to put the clamps on people too much, because you want them to be able to feel like they can experiment and push and then test. It's about testing a hypothesis, and a hypothesis is about proving or disproving it. It's okay if you disprove it. There's learning there. And then identifying the funding for success. Once you've identified the experiment and then you've aligned it to, you can align it to funding. I said it earlier, measure impact across all of these things. Numbers speak volumes. Facts tell, stories sell. You got to measure the activity, or else the funding that you have received in the past may wane and not be there for you in the future. That's what I've got, folks. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to talk a little bit more. We got 3 minutes left. I'll make myself available for any other further questions. I love the robust dialogue. I appreciate you all engaging, and I think we learn from each other, and that's the point of a workshop like this. Any following questions or final statements from the folks who were on?
Mike, thanks a lot. Had a great time today. Really appreciate it.
Good, good.
I was going to echo Perry's statement, Mike. You know, I had my camera off at first because, like you said, I was multitasking. But you know how we do.
Absolutely, brother.
But it's good to see you, brother. And it was an outstanding presentation. Glad I was able to take the time to listen. I was listening to it the whole time, and all of your points and call outs are very much what we needed to hear. They're effective and they're definitely executable. So thank you for doing this.
Good, glad. Thank you for that feedback. Thank you very much. And hope you got a little something. Anybody else?
I would also like to thank you. I was trying to get my notes to pull up because I was taking notes. That's why you were like,
you're all good, Jaleel. You're all good.
Yeah. But I wanted to make sure I got all of this information because it was very important, but I appreciate you.
Got it. Hope you got some tidbits. Definitely.
Same here, Mr. White. Carl Hill here. Very, very good, solid expertise and knowledge. And I like the way it's been graphically laid out to kind of go from sensing to making things happen and to get people to literally get involved. And that's the real key, because some people don't believe they are innovative and they don't have good ideas, but they really do. They just don't know how to pull it out. And so you're found ways to do that. So my hat's off to you.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Blessings to you all. And I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you.